Welcome and good afternoon, good morning, and good evening to the alumni, parents, Brandeis National Committee members, and friends around the world who have registered for this event. I'm Sarah Berkowitz, a member of the Brandeis class of 2020. I graduated with a degree in Near Eastern and Judaic Studies, which gave me the incredible opportunity to take 3 courses with Professor Sarna, and of course I would have taken more had I could. I'd also like to give a special welcome to the members of the Sacker Society who are participating in today's program. Named for Brandeis' first president, Abram Sacker, the Sacker Society recognizes individuals who have named Brandeis in their will, established a charitable gift annuity, created a charitable remainder trust, or made some other form of planned gift. These Friends of Brandeis recognize that planned gifts benefit many generations of Brandesians. Before we begin the program, a logistical note. There'll be some time for Q&A at the conclusion of Professor Sarna's talk. Please use the Q&A feature at the bottom of your screen to submit your questions. We'll get to as many questions as possible. And now to introduce our speaker. Jonathan Sarna is university professor and Joseph H. and Bell R. Braun Professor of American Jewish History at Brandeis and director of the Schusterman Center for Israel Studies. He's also past president of the Association for Jewish Studies and chief historian of the National Museum of American Jewish History in Philadelphia. Professor Sarna is a double Brandeis alumnus, having received both his BA and MA at the university in 1975. He has written, edited, or co-edited more than 30 books, including Lincoln and the Jews, A History, and When General Grant Expelled the Jews. He is best known for the acclaimed American Judaism, A History, recently published in a second edition. Winner of the Jewish Book Council's Jewish Book of the Year in 2004, it has been praised as being, quote, the single best description of American Judaism during its 350 years on American soil. We're thrilled for him to speak today. Welcome, Professor Sarna.
Well, thank you. And it's a joy to be here. And I want to also thank everybody who is viewing. Before we get to the topic, I thought I'd say a word about how things have been going on the campus. Actually, this week is the last week of classes on campus. And students will be going home for Thanksgiving, and then there'll be online classes for the last week. But really, students, I think, are excited that we were able, in a very tough atmosphere, to get through the semester with incredible numbers. The so-called positivity rate is 0.06. The state of Massachusetts is 3.32, which means we're about 50 times better than the state. We've really proved on the campus that if you do all the things they tell you to do, masks and social distancing and hand washing, and you also test students twice a week, test everybody on the campus, indeed, twice a week, you can keep COVID at bay. And I think there is enormous pride within the campus community that we've succeeded, and we've had online classes. People like me teach those. We've had hybrid classes. We have some classes that are being conducted in person, and they've all been successful, and a lot of learning has gone on. Now, the question really is, what do we learn from this crisis? And are there any lessons, first of all, from history? And then I will turn to some of the lessons so far from COVID. But it's important to remember that American Jews are really no strangers to crisis. Back when the American Jewish community began in 1654, as Jews came to what was then called New Amsterdam, then New York, that was in response to crisis. Portugal had captured Recife, Brazil from the Dutch, the Jews were expelled. They lost everything. They had to start over completely anew. Um, and yet then, and I think over and over again in our history, we can see how the community became stronger and more dynamic in response to crises. And really, that's often true in Jewish history. The great Jewish historian Selo Baron titled one of his books, Steeled by Adversity. And I think that's a kind of hopeful lesson for our time as well. Jewish history has taught the Jewish community a lot about resilience and not giving up. Um, it would take a whole Jewish history course to prove that in full, but as Sarah kindly mentioned, and it's so wonderful to see her here. Um, I wrote a book on the expulsion of Jews from Ulysses S. Grant's war zone in 1862, and it's easy to see that subsequently the Jewish community emerged stronger. That expulsion was the most negative official act of anti Semitism in all of American Jewish history. And yet, as Jews rushed to Washington and got Abraham Lincoln to reverse the order, and then as they came together subsequently in 1868, when Ulysses S. Grant ran for president, and they turned a General Order number 11 into an election issue, the first time a Jewish issue really became, in a big way, an issue in American politics. What we can see is that this expulsion, which might have been the nadir for American Jews, ends up paradoxically strengthening the Jewish community's confidence. It actually enhanced the stature of America's rabbis, who played a big role in rushing off to Washington and then speaking with Abraham Lincoln and interacting later with U.S. Grant. And of course, during Grant's presidency, after he's apologized for this order, during Grant's presidency, we actually see more Jewish involvement in government than ever before. So it's a wonderful example of how the community was steeled by adversity and really emerged greatly strengthened. I think the same was true in the Great Depression. Um, uh, that um, uh, really affected the American Jewish community more than any subsequent economic downturn. It was not just the stock market collapse. Um, One of the major banks where Jews kept their money, with the august title, the Bank of the United States, when it failed, something like one in every 10 American Jews, which means every other Jewish family, lost money. And many people lost everything. They put money away to before Social Security, put money away for their old age, and and everything disappeared. And yet, even amidst the Great Depression, with all the decline that took place, we see innovations and communal coming together that strengthen the community. Of course, one of the developments that affects the American Jewish community the most. Nobody much paid attention in the 30s, but a piece of the New Deal legislation legislates the 5-day week, and that has enormous impact on the American Jewish community, like Zoom, about which I'll talk presently. The 5-day week had been an idea that had been talked about, it had been initiated in some places, but suddenly it's greatly intensified in the Great Depression as a cure for unemployment and overproduction. And It never goes away. The depression went away, but the 5-day week stayed and actually became more and more normative. And what that meant was there was no longer a conflict between the Jewish day of rest and the American pattern of work. And indeed, in the post war years, we see all sorts of changes in Jewish communal life brought about really because of the 5-day week and the sense that nobody had to work on Saturday. It's worth remembering there were gloom and doom predictions in the 1930s. Perhaps the greatest of the Jewish social scientists of that time, a man named Uriah Tzvi Engelman, wrote in the prestigious American Journal of Sociology in 1935 about how the younger generation was abandoning the synagogue and Jewish life. They were taking up socialism and communism, and he confidently predicted what he called, quote, the total eclipse of the Jewish church in America. Um, that obviously did not come to pass. And in fact, we saw in his own lifetime in the 1950s a dramatic and totally unexpected revival of Jewish life, especially as Jews move out to the suburbs. And that's a reminder whenever there is a crisis, a downturn, there are folks who predict gloom and doom. Even in 2008, which many people will remember well, we heard gloom and doom prophecies, but history suggests that we often indeed emerge stronger, and that the gloom and doom prophecies are important because they encourage people to negate those prophecies, to work very hard to make sure that they don't happen. Much like the prophets of old, if the prophecy came true, the prophet failed. Jonah succeeded. And so it is here. The prophecies of gloom and doom um, did not come to pass. Hard times, indeed, have often strengthened a Jewish life. And let's move perhaps to some of what's going on around us today. And I think we'll see very much the same thing. Um, One of the clearest impacts of the COVID crisis has been a renewed sense of the value of Jewish community. All over America, we see rabbis and Jewish professional leaders and lay leaders of the Jewish community feted. Here in Boston, they've been called heroes. And the reason is that as COVID developed, and there was a perceived vacuum in leadership at the governmental, especially at the federal level. We saw the Jewish community step in. Federations that had not been in the business of helping poor Jews in some time suddenly gathered together and remembered what they needed to do to help the needy in our midst. They got calls from people who had lost jobs, who were now shut ins in their homes, who were not even able to have contact with their family out of town. And in community after community, we have seen the Jewish community rally and meet those needs, reminding people of the value of Jewish community itself. A pass Seder in a box, those Sedarim, those Seder in a box, were distributed across America. Remarkable pivoting of the community to find ways of making the high holidays deeply meaningful, even if one could not attend them in person. And many synagogues rapidly pivoted to a new online world and met the needs of congregants. There, we now have data from Mark Trencher, and one can see, I think about 80% of American Jews said they were very pleased, extremely pleased with the response of their Jewish institutions. Although this wasn't in the poll, it forms a stark contrast to how people think of government. And one would like to imagine that the lessons about the value of being part of a Jewish community, of being a member of a synagogue, a temple, some other Jewish institution, that those lessons will last post COVID, that the sense that it's really a safety net in addition to its many other benefits. Now, the most remarkable impact of the COVID crisis is really what we're doing now. We're meeting on Zoom, and it's hard to believe, but 8 months ago, most Americans, most American Jews had very little engagement with this technology, didn't know how to use it, and now, of course, it is ubiquitous. And in a way, I think about it the way we think about ready-made clothing in the crisis of the Civil War. It's widely known that the Civil War greatly intensified the use of ready-made clothing. Government used ready-made clothing for soldiers, and ready-made clothing really takes off in the Civil War. Many American Jews were in that business, and it's no accident that after the Civil War, we see in the late 1860s, early 70s, some very opulent synagogues built by people who had made a lot of money with this new technology. But what's so striking is that although intensified by the Civil War ended a long time ago. Ready-made clothing remains a thing, remains pervasive in our society. It didn't go away. And I think the same is going to be said of Zoom and related technologies. They were intensified by the crisis, um, spread much more rapidly than would otherwise have been the case, and they will remain. Now, how will they impact upon us? There's some wonderful news. So, for example, um, it solves a real problem that Jewish education had. Um, as both parents worked, it was difficult to take youngsters to supplementary Jewish education during the week. That's one of the reasons that supplementary Jewish education has declined. Similarly, there were many young people who wanted to go to after school activities. I can't do supplementary Jewish education if it means cutting into soccer or volleyball. Well, now those problems disappear. Um, Nobody has to drive you. We'll bring the classroom into your house. And if you can't participate synchronously at the same time, okay, you'll listen asynchronously. You'll listen later at night to the class. And for serious people, this allows for much more intensive supplementary Jewish education than we have really seen in probably 50 years. Um, I think that Zoom will similarly uh, broaden access to teachers, to religious leaders. Once upon a time, you had to fly them in if you wanted to hear from them. Now it is very clear that you can Zoom them in. I am not suggesting that we will never see people fly anywhere, uh, but I think we're going to use Zoom in new ways. I certainly, speaking for myself, during the pandemic, I've spoken to high school students in various parts of the country and have Zoomed in lots of places that I would not have previously been able to visit and lecture at. It's one thing to say, sure, I'll speak for an hour. It's entirely different matter to say I'll get on a plane, fly there, and the like. Similarly, some of our most exciting American synagogues and temples are seeing that people are joining them from great distances. Um, Central Synagogue, Park Avenue Synagogue have seen all sorts of people from around the country, and those are only two examples I know, uh, who have joined in, joining them on Friday night, on Saturday morning for other programs, uh, feeling that they can now be part of one of the leading synagogues, even though in their own community, because of a very small number of Jews, that was not previously accessible to them. Um, Now, will that mean that very small synagogues and schools will be threatened, that may indeed be the case. That um, those kinds of on the edge Jewish institutions will disappear, and people will say, I'd rather be a virtual member of a great big institution with very rich and dynamic programming than an in-person member of something um, that is much smaller. And there is a concern that small congregations, small schools will be swallowed up, but it may also be that interesting kind of collaborations will happen. Let's meet in person once a month, and the rest of the time will be part of something much larger virtually. Some Jewish schools in small communities have thought about, well, maybe we'll get our secular education in homeschooling settings or public schooling settings, and then use remote learning for Jewish education. We're going to see lots of these kinds of experiments and innovations. Um, the boundaries of what's possible have been changed thanks to virtual community. I think we will look back and say that for a small, scattered people, Zoom is really a godsend, greatly strengthening virtual community. And just like Brandeis alumni can meet virtually, and I can have the pleasure of interacting with that kind of group in all sorts of places. So I think we will see other efforts to bring people together virtually at very low cost, and then supplement that with infrequent but intensive gatherings in person. So that's the good news. There is bad news. I'm deeply concerned, and many in the Jewish education field are deeply concerned at what's been lost. Um, we had a seminar online here at Brandeis in general education where there was concern that a lot of poor students from poor homes, African American, Latino students would be illiterate because they lost the spring. Now they're losing, in many cases, the winter. These are crucial learning times, and the learning that takes place online is much less intensive and less successful, they said. Well, some of the same concerns happen in Jewish education. Um, as much as a tenth of the total Jewish education has been lost for this generation. If one assumes that bar mitzvah is the end for a lot of young people, well, if supplementary school wasn't meeting, they've lost it. But it's not just school, the closing of summer camp, um, the inability to attend birthright programs in Israel, the changes to bar and bat mitzvah celebrations, these are going to have a ripple effect. And this generation, the COVID generation, may know less and will also be scarred and traumatized by all that they were deprived of, and that will ripple through the decades. We certainly have seen places that have successfully transformed bar and bat mitzvah and other life cycle events. And some of those transformations, I think, um, will continue. I expect, for example, that the idea of streaming funerals so that those who cannot be there in person can participate virtually will become normative, and there will be people who will be there in person, people who will be virtually, and the same in terms of participating in a wedding and other life cycle events, and some of the very creative alternative bar and bat mitzvah celebrations that have been less about the party and more about the activities of these young people coming of age. Some of that one hopes will continue. Nevertheless, when one talks to young people, one is impressed at their sense that there's been a tremendous loss, that they've been deprived of certain milestones that they once would have enjoyed, and that will have an impact. Throughout the country, there is discussion about a move away from bricks and mortar in the Jewish community. Um, People say, look how much we've accomplished in the virtual realm without uh, being able to come to synagogues, to Jewish community centers, to other kinds of institutions. Um, Even within the world of the university, there's been a lot of talk. Will we still need all of those buildings? Um, and I think we are likely to see efforts at cost saving. Let's not focus so much on bricks and mortar. Let's focus on the quality of the online program and invest in that. Um, the place where we can gather people in person is obviously much less important, and there will be people joining us uh, from from afar. Even here at Brandeis, uh, some of my own classes have had students who zoom in from different continents. I have a student from Jerusalem, another student who is in Latin America. And the question is, well, there are benefits to being able to reach people that way. Obviously, in-person gatherings have enormous benefits, but maybe there are ways of doing both, and means of saving money and of extending reach um, that will make use of this new technology. Um, One of the questions that everyone in the Jewish community, I think, is asking is whether a trend that we had been very confident about prior to COVID will actually now be reversed. We had been witnessing for more than a decade, a return to the city among younger Jews, whereas previous generations had moved further and further out, suburbia and famous concentric circles of people moving further and further out of the city. Now there were people in city after city who began moving back. Some of this was ideologically motivated, some of it was economically motivated, some of it was motivated by a desire to go green. Why should we commute for a long distance with all that implies? Let's live in the city. Let's be go back to being in walking distance or easy access to public transportation. And a good example of the phenomenon was here in Boston, where a study of the Boston Jewish community showed that the fastest growing area of the community, in other words, the area of Boston where more that had grown the fastest in the previous decade was Cambridge. As young Jews moved to Cambridge, as technology grew in Cambridge, and so on. We have seen changes since COVID as people find themselves working from home. There's a sense, well, maybe we should have a larger home with a study. As people get used to working via Zoom, the question arises, well, maybe I won't need to commute. I'll go in once a week and I can live out in suburbia. Um, in addition, there is a sense that it's a little safer. The distances from one person to the next are much greater. There's more access to the open air in some of those communities, and the riots of the past year and some of the social problems in American cities gave further impetus to folks who said, you know what, maybe this city thing is not what I thought it would be. We have seen lots of evidence, not just in the Jewish world, that with low mortgages, young people who had not thought about moving out to the suburbs suddenly have rediscovered the benefits of suburban living. And if that is the case, then some of the well laid plans about what the next generation would need and how they would be served and what their goals are will have to be rethought. At the same time, some suburban communities that worry, oh, we're aging, young people won't be interested in living where we are, suddenly, I think, discover that, well, maybe that is being rethought and reimagined. Um, I want to give time for questions. Um, so let me simply say that I think we will indeed look back and see that COVID is a turning point in the American Jewish community and in the American community and most world communities as well. It is a rupture. It will be for many a trauma, especially for those who have lost loved ones, and for those grappling with the after effects of having had the disease. But at the same time, um, there are aspects of what we have learned and discovered in COVID times that I think may turn out to greatly strengthen our Jewish community. And years from now, when we look back at 2020, I am hopeful that alongside the heartache and the descriptions of all that went wrong and all the mistakes that were made, there will also be a sense that with it all, we were yet again steeled by adversity. So let me stop there, Sarah, and let's see if there are comments or questions from my friends in the alumni. I think seems like we've had a technical glitch. That'll say, here you are, Sarah. All right.
Right, I'm back.
You're steeled by adversity. All right.
Exactly. I'm just trying to really bring it all home. So here are a few questions that we have regarding the COVID generation. Are you suggesting that the celebration of Jewish life cycle events virtually and conducting Jewish education virtually are now going to be the new normal, even with a vaccine?
I think the Jewish educators have been impressed with what can be accomplished virtually. I personally expect that we will see hybrid, meaning let's get together in person once a week, say, and we'll meet virtually at other times during the week. Um, my guess is that this will become normative. I don't expect that in a few years there'll ever be snow days anymore. People won't even know what they are. Oh, you mean Zoom days? When instead of going to school, we Zoom in. And in the same way, I think Jewish education will be a mixture. By the way, um, people, youngsters who are sick, I think can participate in class via Zoom in ways that was not possible before. It's possible for the elderly to interact with family, even from nursing homes, in ways that we had scarcely begun to use before. So there are benefits. And yes, even bar and bat mitzvah, I think, are likely to have a virtual component, although I don't have any doubt that there will also be an in-person component. But for relatives who are frail or live far away or otherwise prevented from attending, they'll now be able to join virtually, and that will make a great difference. And there's no doubt that the technology will improve so that it'll be easier to integrate those who are in person and those who are attending from afar, and they'll all be part of a single experience. You can't give somebody a hug, and you can't play sports virtually in the same way, but you can nevertheless be part of an experience. And I think many of us have participated in virtual funerals or even weddings that have been deeply meaningful, even though we're not there in person.
Most of the impacts you've mentioned in terms of synagogue life are primarily the impact on non-Orthodox streams. What do you think about Orthodox synagogues and Zoom with COVID?
So it's a wonderful observation. There was a big program on modern Orthodoxy, and one of the questions, which was also asked in a study by Rabbi Trencher, was, do you expect that there will people will find ways to incorporate social media or distance media in orthodoxy. The truth of the matter is that Orthodox synagogues across the country have introduced regular classes by Zoom, meetings by Zoom during the week. There's no problem with that. And they've also, in some cases, introduced worship during the week. It's not identical to being within the synagogue, but it sure beats not doing any of those things. And my guess is that, like any great change, this will go across all of the movements. My definition, some who studied American Judaism with me, of a truly significant movement, the women's movement, is that it impacts from one end of the spectrum all the way to the other end of the spectrum. And I think that's going to be true here. It will impact in different ways, but I think we are already seeing that impact even within the Orthodox community.
Do you think the American Jewish community was somehow better equipped to weather this storm based on its past?
Um, yes, the American Jewish community um, had an infrastructure. Um, we had federations. People were once very critical of some of these big Jewish institutions, but it turned out, as one of them wrote, that when you have big problems, you're glad that you have great big institutions that can meet those challenges. Similarly, a story that has not sufficiently been told is how Jewish funders got together and resolved that they would pool funds, work together, um, and try and meet the needs of organizations that suddenly found themselves imperiled, organizations that had depended on visitors and now wouldn't have them, cultural organizations and the like. The fact that only a few of them have now gone out of business is really a credit to those funders. And when you look, you see these are people who had learned, they'd met one another before the crisis, they'd learned how to work together. And I'm very proud to say that one of our Brandeis alumni, Dr. Felicia Herman, the head of Natan, has played a huge role in coordinating this really relief effort. I have to say, I wish our federal government had pivoted as quickly and as well as the Jewish community did, and the Jewish community was able to do what it did because we did have institutions and well-trained Jewish professional leaders. Many of them trained at the Ornstein program at Brandeis, well-trained leaders who knew that it was their mission to help the community at this hour of need, just as earlier leaders during World War II and during many other crises stepped in. Now it was their turn. And I think we will look back and say, overwhelmingly, they met the challenge.
The restaurant industry has been hit extremely hard. What do you anticipate will be the long-term effect on the availability of kosher food for those living in smaller communities and traveling to places that have restaurants that go out of business?
The problem of restaurants is, of course, a problem nationwide, and uh, we've already seen in many communities, Boston is a good example, a big decline in restaurants even before COVID. And this, of course, has hurt it enormously. Um, I think that people will be happy to return to restaurants once COVID is over. Um, I have been interested in some new experiments across the country of special kinds of restaurants, restaurants that can really employ and even be managed by those with various forms of disabilities, and that they're specially built for that. And so going to a restaurant, on the one hand, is an experience and you want to go out, but you also have a sense you are helping people who otherwise wouldn't be employed in the community. And great advances have been made in creating kitchens and the like, where the disabled can be put to work. Now, the point is that if we create some of those institutions, I think there will be people who will keep them going, not just as a business, but also from charitable motivations, and that may allow certain kinds of kosher restaurants to remain. It should be noted that in community after community, efforts have been made um, to help the kosher restaurant, either by pop-up outside restaurant. Some of those restaurants and caterers played a huge role in the different holidays, Passover, the high holidays, and so on. But they are suffering, and it does behoove all of us, once COVID is done, to make extra effort to help those who in that industry, because they are among the uh, most harmed of all of the different parts of the Jewish community.
Final question. Do you think the American Jewish community is distinct from other large communities, Canada, the UK, France, Israel, in terms of the COVID impact, or will the COVID impact be comparable?
So and the easy way to answer that is that I certainly do not claim to have made international studies of the impact of COVID, but I do try and read what's going on. Of course, the situation in Israel is different because it's largely government managed. And the that's an entirely different situation, and as we've seen, it's gotten caught up in religious politics and so on. I think it's fair to say that some Jewish communities around the country, I'm sorry, around the world, let's say Australia, New Zealand, those countries have um, taken a very different stance in how to fight COVID than American governments did, and the Jewish community was the beneficiary. Where COVID was tamped down early, obviously the impact was less. Um, uh, Even that's true in Canada, where the effects have not been nearly as strong as in the United States. Um, it is also the case that, for probably accidental reasons, the number of Jews in the United States who were stricken by COVID and who lost their lives to COVID. I did see an initial estimate of 5,000. Um, that's a big number. And that really suggests that America was hit particularly hard. And since America is the largest diaspora Jewish community in the world, it follows that the American Jewish community has been hit particularly hard. But I have heard from people outside the Jewish community certain expressions of envy. You know, we wish we had the communal infrastructure, say they, to do what the Jewish community has done. But I think that we will be studying some of this for a long time in the hopes of learning from the experience and avoiding mistakes and doing even better if, God forbid, there is another such a crisis, as there will inevitably be down the road. Um, but for now, I hope people come away in the last minute with a sense that uh, there's some good news hidden among all the gloom and doom of COVID. And while there will be an inevitable call, let's return to normalcy, and certainly there'll be a return to travel and a return to visits to Israel and the like. There will also be some very profound changes, and hopefully we will look back and be able to say that we've been strengthened by these changes, and that we too were steeled by adversity. Thanks.
Thank you, Professor Sarna, and thank you to all of you for joining this event. We will share a recording of the program when it becomes available, usually within a couple of weeks. A couple of other quick announcements. Giving Tuesday is coming up on December 1st. Please save the date to make your gift and help Brandeis set a new single-day fundraising record. We look forward to seeing you at more virtual events in the coming months. There'll be faculty speakers, alumni panels, trivia, cooking classes, and more. Please be sure to check your email about information about events and Giving Tuesday. Thanks again. Have a great rest of the day or evening, and happy Thanksgiving.